Welcome to our posts. Today, we will see stories of r/PettyRevenge. Caused food stealing co-worker puke all over himself. Small business, max 10 people were in the office at the same time. So when someone is stealing food from the fridge, people notice it fairly quickly. However, this was the owner's son. Now the owner was known for nicking food, but he would at least pay you back. Sometimes, his son, about 20 at the time, did not, and was also a jerk about it, and most of the people were getting fed up. So one day I brought coloring liquid from home, which my wife used to make blue treats cake, ice cream for our kids. He was always stealing my dairy products, and I thought the blue would make it less appealing. Almost forgot about it until a coworker was fuming that someone had eaten almost all of her cottage cheese and that she didn't have enough for herself. So I asked her if she was willing to sacrifice what was left, sprinkled a few blue drops in there, went to the culprit and said, "Dude, where you eating this? It's gone bad. You can't eat this. How did you not notice?" I could hardly finish my sentence, as he threw up all over his desk and himself. Violently, for all to see. The blue spots in the leftovers I showed him did look rather dramatic. Next story. Petty revenge to a public speakerphone user. Simple story. Today, I got on the 26th floor elevator and a man was having a speakerphone conversation on the elevator ride. I decided it was annoying, so I put on Walk by Pantera full blast. Him and I were the only people on the elevator ride. He asked me to put it down. I told him to shut off his speakerphone and put his phone to his ear if he wants me to shut off the music. I said my music is as annoying as your conversation. He called me an ah. I smiled and said cool man, and we went our separate ways. I got a little joy from that encounter. Next story. Not my finest moment, but funny as hell. Back when I was in my mid-20s, I bought my first place to live. Nothing great, it was just a trailer house, but it was mine. My neighbors were okay for the first few months. Then one day I was hearing banging on my walls. The kids on one side were using my outside wall to constantly bounce tennis balls off. It drove me nuts. Talked to the neighbor. They said kids will be kids and didn't put a stop to it. I decided it's time to do something after a few days and got a set of extremely loud air horns like they use on trains and semi-trucks. Put them under the skirting. The next time the kids started, I hooked up the air hose from my air compressor and opened the valve. The kids screamed and ran crying. I was crying from laughing so hard. The parents were pissed and came over making threats and yelling at me. The second petty revenge I got was one night I hid a wireless battery-powered doorbell under their stairs and I'd randomly push button to ring it. Their dogs would go crazy barking and running around. I changed the batteries, that thing, about a dozen times. I used so much. Next story. No pen? That's a problem. I worked for a board. I got a new chair and I quickly found out he never carried a pen. He always had things to sign during meetings. At the first meeting when he was chair, I was seated next to him. When it was time to sign something, without looking at me or asking, he simply put his hand out for me to hand him a pen. He was a professional and an attorney. He never had a pen. So at a subsequent meeting I got my petty revenge. The nature of the organization meant that several members had disabilities. I deliberately set out the name plaques before the meeting and seated him between a person with a disability who was unable to wield a pen and the sign language interpreter. The look of desperation when he realized no one was near him to hand him a pen was priceless. This was several years ago and it still gives me glee. Next story. Stopped a guy from flicking cigarettes from his property into the park with petty revenge. This happened many years ago. There's a park that I like to walk my dog in, with a creek and lots of trees. It's quite nice. The entry to the park is a little path that borders someone's backyard, which is separated by a wooden fence about 7 feet tall. I noticed over a period of weeks a disgusting habit that the dweller of the property had. There were dozens of cigarette butts strewn about on the grass. Instead of properly disposing of the butts, the dweller's usual habit was to flick them over the fence into the park. One evening, I was going through the path. A lit cigarette butt flew over the fence and almost hit me in the eye. That was the last straw. Next time I went through the path, I peeked through the boards of the fence and didn't see anyone in the backyard. Then picked up all the dozens of butts and quickly chucked them over the fence into their yard. I have never seen any more butts in the park again. Next story. Take your dog's poop back. I live in a small cul-de-sac off a main road. Our neighbors to one side have been nothing but a thorn in our side since they adopted two med-large breed dogs that they just let roam all over the cul-de-sac. Mainly, they let them crap on any and every front lawn and don't bother picking it up. It's been a thing where I've made a point not to let my own dog poop on the front lawn, so I know if I find a pile out there, it wasn't my dog. It's been such a problem that I've made a post about it here before. Well, it happened again. Doing some pruning in the front yard, I find two piles off to one side. I've been having some insomnia the last couple nights, so I know this is the perfect time to return the piles their dogs so generously left behind. At about 1 a.m., I went outside with baggie in hand, and instead of putting it in their garbage can like last time, I tossed those piles directly into the middle of their driveway, no bag, just poop. One kind of bounced and rolled under a car, but the other was a firm splat onto the pavement right next to the driver's side door of a different car. This morning over coffee, I heard a disgruntled expletive and subsequent hose splashing. While I'm sure this won't stop the poops from coming, I think I found my new favorite way to return their dog's crap. Next story. My mother kept donating me junk, so I hid 200 ducks in her house. I'm not sure if this is a petty revenge or even a revenge due to the outcome, but it started as a way to have some petty revenge to my mother. My mother is notorious for giving me junk. A few examples from last month. Address stamps with my information on them from when I lived at home 15 years ago. A dentist appointment card with appointments from 2006. About 30 keys. Just 30 random keys without knowing where they fit on. USB sticks and memory cards ranging from a few MB to max 2G. I love my mother, and I know she doesn't mean this in a bad way, but I have told her to stop it so many times to no avail. When my father was alive, it wasn't as bad, but now I really have to be careful when I or my wife go over, or we get another box of junk to take home. She is still cleaning up the house since the death, so I understand from where it all comes. But some things are clearly meant for the bin instead of donating it to me. But last month I had really had enough and bought 200 plastic ducks online. When she was on holiday recently, I planned to take my revenge and hid them all over her house. And by everywhere, I really mean everywhere. Some are very visible, like in the middle of the hall, in her washing machine, or on the photo frames. But most are really hidden in places where she won't look directly, like in sculptures, between the roots of her plants, between two coffee cups, in the pockets of her clean trousers, between her clean folded sheets, on top of the shower head, basically in every nook and cranny of the house I could find. They are always hidden at height because she regularly babysits our toddler and I don't want him to be able to swallow them. You would think that 200 ducks is a lot, but I recently ordered a new bag because there are so many places I can still hide some. The revenge part has failed a bit because she loves it. Every time she finds one, she's lotching, and we get a photo of the found duck. Edit. The giving junk thing has been going on ever since I've left my parents' house, so around 15 years, long before the death of my dad last year. And yes, I have tried everything, from refusing it to accepting and throwing away in her bin. It just doesn't click for her that if she finds something, it doesn't mean that I can use it. She had told me a few times that it is junk that she's giving me. The current situation is that if I don't accept it, she stores it for later read next visit, or she takes it with her when she comes over for a visit. Edit 2. So many people add stuff to my story and think my mother is senile, a hoarder, or has problems throwing thing away, but it's not like that at all. And I don't want people to think that of my mom, lol. She is way too kind for that. My mother is a healthy 64 years young independent woman, capable of throwing away stuff. She has cleaned up a lot of stuff my dad collected over the years, like books, magazines, clothes, and everything that my dad bought double, which we only found out after his passing. Everything without real sentimental value or 0% usefulness has been thrown in the bin by her. The problem is with stuff that is between 5 and 1% usefulness, like a commentor said. Not the sentimental stuff. We went through that last year after my dad died. But things that are virtually useless, and in most cases are. Things like appointment cards from 26, 30 random keys, vacuum bags, while she knows we have a Dyson because she bought one herself because she likes our Dyson so much. Dried out paint bins, those plastic pots you get when you buy new plants, to name a few others. Things most people know are junk, but she somehow thinks are useful for me. She even said sometimes that it's junk, but might be useful for me. Stuff that, when I point it out, she knows is stupid to give me, like that appointment card from 2006. And yes, we are helping with clearing the house whenever we can, and she wants our help, obviously. But this is the PettyRevenge Reddit, not the Look at Me Helping Mom Reddit, so I like to keep the story relevant to the revenge part. Next story. Let me tell you something before you go. I spent almost 50 years in between a conflict between my mom and her sister. Aunt was your typically holy roller who believed her poop didn't stink because she went to church every week. She had the typically holier-than-thou attitude about everything. She put on an "I'm such a wonderful person" appearance to everyone, but at home she was wicked to my mom. My mom's great sin was abandoning her family to enlist in the military. Her sister never forgave her for forming her own life and spent the rest of her life making my mom feel like trash. My mom was a very passive person, so she never dared stand up for herself. I was 5 at the time when Aunt came to town, and even at that age I quickly saw how nasty she was to my mom. I watched my mom cower around her, so logically I feared her too. She took offense to my fear and did what any rational adult would do in that situation. She decided to get even with a 5-year-old and turned her wrath on me. Some of it was petty, like buying my siblings expensive gifts, and I would get a bottle of Old Spice or a bar of soap. Some was more direct. She would yell at me and belittle me anytime we stayed at her house. I hid the abuse from my parents, so she was a regular babysitter. When I got older and didn't need a babysitter, I was able to reduce contact. She then switched from direct attacks to spreading lies about me to neighbors and anyone who would listen. When I was 17, I found out she told all of our neighbors I was a Satanist. When I got married, a switch flipped, and she decided I was now her favorite nephew and acted like we were always best friends, and she didn't spend 20+ years abusing me. Well, 25-year-old me didn't fall for it, but I decided to play along. Why? I was cynical and knew how to hold a grudge. She was unmarried, childless, and loaded. So I spent the next 2 decades acting like I could stand to be in the same room with her. I would buy her thoughtful gifts, which were always whatever was on clearance at the religious bookstore. She would go on about how spiritual I was and would shower us with gifts and expensive meals. Her wrath was no longer directed at me, but she doubled the venom spit at my mom. She made it her mission to get me to turn against my mom. She made up ridiculous events that never happened, like my mom trying to smother their mother in her sleep, or her repeatedly trying to push her down stairwells. Through all of it, my mom took her abuse, never standing up for herself. It killed her that her sister hated her, but she never stopped trying to rebuild their relationship. Time marched on and Aunt was diagnosed with a terminal disease. In her final months, she decided to stick the knife in one last time and give it a good twist. She announced she was going no contact with her sister. My mom was devastated. Through 60+ years of abuse, she still loved her sister and wanted to be there to care for her. Aunt denied that, and it broke her. I tried to talk her into letting my mom visit her, but she claimed she had talked to her priest and he told her my mother didn't deserve forgiveness, and being such a strong Catholic as I was, I should respect that. My mom's only comfort was that her son was there to care for her sister. so I did my duty and was with her almost every day until she passed. In her final days, she was very weak and couldn't really talk. Just whispering one or two words here or there was all she could manage. Knowing she was powerless to protest, I delivered what would be my second biggest FU to her. I called my mom and told her she was welcome to come and visit whenever she wanted. My mom was elated. She rushed over immediately and returned every day. She would sit there for hours, holding her hand and talking to her sister, so happy to be reunited. My aunt would stare daggers at me while I smiled back. My mom was blissfully unaware that her sister didn't want her there and got to be with her sister during her final days. A huge weight was lifted off her shoulders as they had finally reconciled. I never told my mom that her sister never actually told me she could come, and that secret will go to my grave. On the last day, it was clear she was in her final moments. It was just her and I in the room, so I leaned in close and delivered my farewell message. I spoke loudly and clear to make sure she could hear me. I want you to know, I'm an atheist. Her eyes told me she understood, and within a minute she was gone. I'm not sure if my message pushed her over the edge, but I kind of hope so. Oh, and thanks to her generosity and her will, I'm somehow managing to go on without her. Next story. Punished for speeding. Enjoy your long hours drive. This happened in the 90s. I was in the Army, 18 years old. I was assigned to bring the Army staff with the military jeep in the morning. I was reported for speeding and my commanding officer punished me with 10 days extension of my Army service and also 10 days not allowed to go home. I was assigned as a standby driver during the night. Around 7 I had a call that I needed to go pick up my commanding officer and take him to different outposts to check that the guards were doing their job properly. Army vehicles have a speed limit of 35 km in the city. Since I was punished in the morning for speeding, I swore that I would keep this speed limit no matter what. It took us 3.5 hours to make a 1-hour trip. I could see him tapping his fingers nervously on the dashboard and mumbling incoherent angry words, but there was nothing he could do about it. He never spoke to me again after that. Next story. She ate it. The setup. Back at uni again, a group of us liked to dine together once a week along the Miracle Mile just off campus. One girl would only order off the appetizer section, and then do the "that looks good, can I have a bite?" routine until she had filled her plate. Everybody got tired of this, but she was otherwise kind and helpful, so we let it ride. The revenge. At one meal, she placed her order last, grabbed her purse, and said she'd be right back. Our food was brought while she was gone. By the time she got back, each of us had put something on her plate from our own. She thanked us, and we all started eating. When we were almost through, I nudged the guy next to me and said, "She ate it. Pay up," he said, later, and we both started laughing. The girl turned pale. "What did you do to my food? What did you put in it? Oh my God, I think I'm gonna be sick." Then she made quick time to the restroom and did not come out for several minutes. The spoiler. We had done nothing to her food. We only acted like we had. She was upset because her imagination got the better of her. The epilogue. It took a long time to convince her that everything was fine and that we were only pulling a prank. After that, however, she would order her own meals and only mooch off our desserts. We could live with that. Next story. I moved on from a guy who kept ghosting me and ignoring me. 1 year after he moves away, he texts me wanting to reconnect. Guy I had a thing for kept ghosting me, so I moved on with my life. A year later, messages me out of the blue. I had a neighbor 3 years ago who I used to text back and forth a lot. He'd always talk about hanging out and whatnot, but anytime I'd offer a time and day I'm available, it'd be crickets. One time I even came by and gave him some extra cookies I made and he wouldn't respond. I had texted him earlier that morning and he said I could come by at a certain time. When I did, crickets. The following day I still had the cookies, and when he saw me and I told him I'd been looking for him to give me the cookies, he told me he forgot. I gave him the cookies, and he apparently liked them a lot. I admit I had a bit of a thing for him. One day he did decide to hang out with me. He worked from home, so we decided it'd be 6 p.m. So, an hour before, I confirm and he doesn't answer. An hour later, he texts me that he's busy with his Twitch stream, and then an hour later, he even texts me that he needs time to change. We didn't go out until around 9:30 p.m. And by that point, I was pretty upset since I put in a lot of effort to look good. We hanged out one more time after that, but he'd ask me for selfies, what I'm wearing, and it was extremely obvious that he just wanted sex. At some point, I stopped pining for him because I wasn't going to waste my time on someone who didn't respect my time. At some point 2 years ago, he texted me he was moving away and I wished him well. About 2 months ago, he texted me for the first time since he left. He kept going on and on about how he missed me, how he wanted me to make my cookies for him, and how I should send selfies of myself. He wanted to hang out, and it was then that I remembered the constant ghosting, the plans that would always follow through, the times he made me wait. I'd been out of town a couple of times with work on the nights he wanted to hang out. For the past 2 months, I'd gone back and forth with him, pushing the dates that we could hang out and reconnect back, and never sent any photos of myself. I'd take days to reply to him. Part of it was that I was petty, but another part of it was that he no longer had any weight in my life anymore. I'd never gotten an apology before when he'd promise a time and either cancel or make me wait long enough. Instead, he would always tell me I'm just being emotional and brush it off. After a little over 2 months of doing the same thing to him that he did to me, today, he sent me a message that said, "Cool then, I'm done being nice." I just thumbs-upped it and blocked him. Next story. I bested my landlord's dog. So I rent a basement apartment from a couple a few years shy of senior status. They don't have children, just a 5-year-old Samoyed named Dodo whom is extremely spoiled. We have a good-sized fenced-in yard that the dog never occupies. She just hangs by the driveway and occasionally runs into the woods. Every day I bring my indoor cat outside for a while. I keep an eye on him and read. But sure as crap, when we get out there, Dodo wants to be in the yard. Whatever part of the yard we're hanging in, Dodo slowly walks up, pees, and walks away. I hate passive-aggressive people, never mind a passive-aggressive dog. Well, my cat was hanging in his favorite spot in a bush. He roams 20 feet away, and Dodo swoops in and takes a dump in the bush. So I collected some of my cat's hair, sprinkled it all around the bush. Then I peed directly on her poop. Just 30 minutes ago, Dodo comes in the yard, heads straight for the bush, sniffs around, looks at me side-eyed while I pierced her with dagger eyes, and she cowered away slowly with her head down. Justice is my favorite. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel our posts.